At a critical business dinner where Robert Sterling needs to make a powerful impression, his unassuming housekeeper, Grace Washington, steps in as his partner and shocks everyone, including him, with her extraordinary poise, intellect, and hidden past. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Robert Sterling's penthouse office as he paced behind his mahogany desk, phone pressed to his ear. At 52, Sterling had built a real estate empire from nothing, but today's call had shaken him to his core. "I understand, Mr. Sterling." His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "The Yamamoto Corporation representatives will expect your wife to attend tonight's dinner. It's a cultural expectation for their biggest deals. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to." Miss Sterling's jaw tightened. His wife had left him 6 months ago, taking half his assets and his social standing with her. The divorce wasn't finalized, but she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with his business affairs anymore. This dinner represented a $50 million international partnership, the kind that could set his company's future for the next decade. "Sir?" his assistant prompted. "I'll handle it, Janet. Just make sure the reservation at Le Bernardin is confirmed for 8 people instead of 7. As he hung up, Sterling's eyes fell on the family photo still sitting on his desk, a reminder of better times. His thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock on his door. "Mr. Sterling?" came a warm, familiar voice. "I've finished organizing your study. Is there anything else you need before I head home?" Grace Washington had been Sterling's housekeeper for 3 years. At 45, she carried herself with quiet dignity that Sterling had always respected. Unlike the parade of staff who had come and gone, Grace had become a steady, reliable presence in his increasingly chaotic life. She had a way of anticipating his needs, fresh coffee appearing just as he needed it, important documents mysteriously organized just when he was looking for them. "Actually, Grace," Sterling said, turning from the window, "I have an unusual request." She stepped into the office, her intelligent brown eyes attentive. Grace had always struck Sterling as someone who possessed far more depth than her job suggested. In their brief conversations over the years, he'd glimpsed hints of a sharp mind and worldly knowledge that seemed at odds with her current position. "I have a crucial business dinner tonight, a partnership that could make or break the next phase of my company's growth. The problem is—" He paused, feeling the awkwardness of the situation. "The Japanese executives expect me to bring my wife. They value family stability in their business partnerships." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "And Mrs. Sterling won't be attending." "Mrs. Sterling won't be attending anything with me anymore," Sterling admitted. "Look, I know this is highly irregular, but would you consider accompanying me tonight? Just as a dinner companion. You'd be doing me an enormous favor." Grace was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Sterling found himself holding his breath, realizing how much he hoped she'd say yes. Not just for the business deal, but because in recent months, his conversations with Grace had become the most genuine interactions in his day. "What would this involve exactly?" she asked carefully. "Dinner at Le Bernardin with 7 Japanese executives and their translator. High-end restaurant, formal attire. You'd need to be comfortable in that environment." A small smile played at the corners of Grace's mouth. "Mr. Sterling, you might be surprised by what I'm comfortable with." 2 hours later, Sterling stood in his bedroom, adjusting his cufflinks for the 3rd time. His nerves had nothing to do with the business deal and everything to do with the woman, who had agreed to help him. He'd arranged for Grace to use his guest suite to prepare and had his personal shopper deliver a selection of evening wear. When Grace emerged from the guest room, Sterling's breath caught in his throat. Gone was the simple housekeeper's attire. Instead, she wore an elegant black cocktail dress that perfectly complemented her figure, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. But it wasn't just her appearance that had transformed. There was something in her bearing, a confidence that seemed to radiate from within. "You look," Stunning, Sterling managed. Thank you, Grace replied, slipping on the jewelry he'd provided. Shall we go? In the car, Sterling found himself stealing glances at his companion. Grace, I have to ask, you seem remarkably comfortable with all this. Have you done something like this before? Grace gazed out at the city lights streaming past. In another life, perhaps. What do you mean? She was quiet for so long that Sterling thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke. Before I started working for you, I had a different career, a different life entirely. What happened? Life happened, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes we make choices we never thought we'd have to make. Sometimes circumstances force our hand. She turned to look at him. But that's a conversation for another time. Tonight is about your business dinner. As they pulled up to Le Bernardin, Sterling felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The restaurant's understated elegance set the tone for what he hoped would be a successful evening. The Yamamoto Corporation executives were already seated at their reserved table. 3 distinguished men in their 50s and 60s, along with their young female translator. Mr. Sterling-san, the eldest executive, Kenji Yamamoto, rose to greet them. His eyes immediately went to Grace, and Sterling saw a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or assessment. Mr. Yamamoto, allow me to introduce Grace Washington, my... Sterling hesitated for just a moment, then continued with confidence. My partner. Grace stepped forward and, to Sterling's amazement, bowed slightly in the traditional Japanese manner. Yamamoto-san hajimemashite. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. The executives exchanged glances, clearly impressed. Yamamoto's stern expression softened into a genuine smile. Ah, Washington-san speaks Japanese. This is wonderful surprise. As they settled at the table, Sterling watched in fascination as Grace seamlessly navigated the complex social dynamics of the dinner. She asked thoughtful questions about Japanese business culture, demonstrated knowledge of international markets that left even Sterling surprised, and somehow managed to put everyone at ease with her natural warmth and intelligence. Washington-san, the second executive, Mr. Tanaka, leaned forward during the main course. You have very interesting perspective on Asian markets. What is your background? Grace smiled graciously. I spent several years working in international finance with a focus on Asian markets. It's fascinating how cultural understanding can bridge business relationships. Sterling nearly choked on his wine. International finance? He managed to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was reeling. Who was this woman he'd employed for? 3 years? The dinner continued to unfold beautifully. Grace's presence seemed to elevate the entire evening, and Sterling watched as the usually reserved Japanese executives warmed to her genuine interest in their culture and business philosophy. She discussed market trends with the sophistication of a seasoned analyst, shared insights about American consumer behavior that impressed even Sterling, and somehow managed to weave in personal anecdotes that had the entire table laughing. During dessert, Yamamoto raised his sake cup. Sterling-san, you have chosen your partner very wisely. In business, we judge a man not only by his accomplishments, but by the character of those he chooses to surround himself with. Sterling felt a flush of pride, though he knew he couldn't take credit for Grace's remarkable performance. As the evening wound down and business cards were exchanged, Yamamoto pulled Sterling aside. We are very impressed with your company's proposal, Sterling-san. But tonight, meeting Washington-san, we see that you understand the importance of wisdom and character in partnership. We would be honored to move forward with this venture. In the car on the way home, Sterling could barely contain his amazement. Grace, what you did tonight, that was incredible. You saved a $50 million deal. I'm glad it went well, Grace replied simply. But I have to know, international finance, Japanese language skills? Who are you, really? Grace was quiet, for a long moment watching the city lights blur past the window. Finally, she sighed. My name is Grace Washington, and I have a PhD in International Economics from Columbia University. I spent 15 years as a senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, specializing in Asian markets. Sterling stared at her in shock. Then why, am I cleaning your house? Grace finished. 3 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He was only 52. The medical bills were crushing, and I needed to be available for his care. Traditional finance jobs don't offer that flexibility. Sterling felt something shift in his chest, a combination of admiration, guilt, and something deeper he couldn't quite name. I took the housekeeping position because it paid well enough to cover our expenses, and you were never home during the day, which meant I could be there for David when he needed me. Her voice grew soft. He passed away 8 months ago. Grace, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. How could you? We barely spoke beyond work matters. She turned to face him. But tonight reminded me of who I used to be, who I might be again. Sterling was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned. Why didn't you tell me about your background, your qualifications? Grace smiled sadly. Would it have mattered? You needed a housekeeper, not a financial analyst. And honestly, for a while, I needed to be just Grace the housekeeper. It was simpler. Less painful than remembering what I'd lost. The next morning, Sterling arrived at his office with a new perspective. He'd spent most of the night thinking about Grace's revelation, about the assumptions he'd made, and about the opportunities he might have missed by seeing people only through the lens of their current circumstances. At 10 o'clock, Grace arrived, for her usual workday, dressed once again in her simple housekeeper's attire. But Sterling saw her differently now. The intelligence in her eyes, the confident way she carried herself, the quiet dignity that he'd somehow never fully appreciated. Grace, could I speak with you in my office? She followed him, settling, into one of the leather chairs across from his desk with the same composure she'd shown at the restaurant. I've been thinking about last night, Sterling began. About everything you told me. And I realize I owe you an apology. Grace looked surprised. For what? For seeing you as just the housekeeper, for never taking the time to really know the person working in my home, for not recognizing your talents and intelligence. Mr. Sterling, you employed me fairly and treated me with respect. That's more than many people in my position could say. But it wasn't enough, was it? Here you were, one of the most qualified people I've ever met, and I had you organizing my sock drawer. Grace laughed, a genuine sound that Sterling realized he'd rarely heard. To be fair, your sock drawer was in desperate need of organization, Sterling smiled, then grew serious. Grace, I want to offer you a position, a real position, as my Director of International Development. The Yamamoto deal is just the beginning. I want to expand Sterling Enterprises into Asian markets, and I can't. Think of anyone more qualified to lead that effort. Grace was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. That's a generous offer, Mr. Sterling. It's not generous. It's smart business. You're exactly what this company needs. He paused. What I need. And what would happen to your housekeeping situation? Grace asked with a slight smile. I'll figure something out. Maybe learn to organize my own sock drawer. Grace stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You know, last night was the first time in 3 years that I felt like myself again. Like the person I was before everything fell apart. Then take the job. Be that person again. She turned back to him. There's something else you should know. The reason I was so effective last night wasn't just my professional background. When I was at Goldman Sachs, I actually worked on a preliminary analysis of Yamamoto Corporation 5 years ago. I knew their business model, their expansion strategy, their corporate culture. Sterling stared at her. You knew all along how to handle that dinner. I had some advantages, yes. But more importantly, I believed in what you were trying to accomplish. Your proposal was solid, your company has integrity, and your vision for expansion is sound. I wasn't just playing a role last night. I was genuinely advocating for a partnership I believed in. Then you'll take the position? Grace smiled, the first truly radiant smile Sterling had ever seen from her. I'll take the position, but I have some conditions. Name them. First, I want full autonomy over the International Development Division. Second, I want equity in any deals I bring in. And third, she paused, her expression turning playful. I still think you need someone to organize your sock drawer. We might need to hire a new housekeeper. Sterling laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. Done, and definitely done. 6 months later, Sterling Enterprises had secured 3 major international partnerships, with Grace's division becoming the company's fastest-growing segment. The Yamamoto deal had been just the beginning. Grace's reputation in international finance, combined with her cultural sensitivity and strategic thinking, had opened doors Sterling never knew existed. But the transformation went deeper than business success. Sterling found himself looking forward to their daily strategy meetings, to Grace's insights and perspectives, to the easy conversation that had developed between them. She had moved from the guest suite to her own penthouse apartment, but Sterling found he missed having her presence in his home. On a Thursday evening in late spring, as they worked late reviewing proposals for a potential European expansion, Sterling found himself studying Grace as she analyzed market data. She had grown into her role with a confidence that made her even more attractive than she'd been that first night at Le Bernardin. "Grace," he said suddenly. She looked up from her laptop. "Yes?" "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no pressure attached to this question. Your job, our professional relationship, none of that changes regardless of your answer." Grace closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "Okay. Would you have dinner with me? Not for business. Not because I need a companion for Japanese executives. Just because I'd like to have dinner with you." Grace was quiet for a moment, and Sterling felt his heart rate increase. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from employer-employee to true partners, and somewhere along the way, Sterling had realized his feelings had deepened into something much more personal. "Robert," Grace said softly, "I thought you'd never ask." The relief and joy that flooded through Sterling was almost overwhelming. "Really? I'd love to have dinner with you, but this time I'm choosing the restaurant." "Deal. Where did you have in mind?" Grace smiled mischievously. "There's this little soul food place in Harlem that makes the best fried chicken you've ever had. Nothing fancy, no business deals, just good food and good company." Sterling realized that in all his years of high-end restaurants and business dinners, he'd never been more excited about a meal. It sounds perfect. 1 year later, the annual Sterling Enterprises board meeting was wrapping up, with Grace presenting the International Division's remarkable growth numbers. Sterling watched with pride as she fielded questions from board members with the same grace and expertise she'd shown that first night with the Japanese executives. "Any other questions?" Grace asked, and when the room remained quiet, she smiled. "Then I'll turn things back over to Mr. Sterling." As the board members filed out, chatting excitedly about the company's expansion plans, Sterling and Grace remained behind. "Excellent presentation," Sterling said, loosening his tie. "Thank you. I think they're finally starting to see me as more than just the former housekeeper who got lucky." Sterling walked over to where Grace was packing up her materials. "Grace, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." She looked up at him, and Sterling was struck again by how much his life had changed since that desperate phone call about needing a dinner companion. "What's that?" Sterling reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's eyes widened as he got down on one knee. "Grace Washington, you've transformed my business, my perspective, and my life. You've shown me what it means to see people for who they truly are, not just what they appear to be." You've made me a better man and a better leader." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant, solitaire diamond. "Will you marry me?" Grace's hand flew to her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. "Robert, I know it might seem complicated given how we met, but—" "Yes," Grace interrupted, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." As Sterling slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace cupped his face in her hands. "You know, when I first agreed to go to that dinner with you, I never imagined it would lead to this." "What did you think would happen?" "Honestly, I thought I'd help you get through one awkward business dinner, earn a nice bonus, and go back to organizing your sock drawer." Sterling pulled her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "Well, you definitely got me through the dinner. And I suppose I'll have to go back to organizing your sock drawer," Grace teased. "Actually," Sterling said, spinning her around, "I was thinking we could hire someone for that. I have much better ideas for how to spend our time." As they kissed in the empty boardroom, Sterling reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate business dinner had revealed not just Grace's hidden talents, but his own blindness to the extraordinary people already in his life. Sometimes the most shocking revelations aren't about what we discover in others, but about what we learn about ourselves. And sometimes the person who can change your entire world is already right there, waiting for you to really see them. The woman who had shocked everyone at that business dinner had gone on to shock Sterling in ways he never could have imagined, not just with her professional capabilities, but with her capacity to transform his understanding of success, partnership, and love. And in the end, that was the most shocking revelation of all.